This is Ross Coulthard, and you are listening to That UFO Podcast.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to That UFO Podcast. My name is Andy, and I have a huge interview to start 2025. And joining me on the interview now is a filmmaker. She is the creator and host of one of the biggest podcasts across the planet right now, the Telepathy Tapes. I'd like to welcome Ky Dickens. Ky, welcome.
Thank you, Andy. It's a pleasure to be here.
Very good to have you on. First off, huge congratulations on your success. You've had a career before the Telepathy Tapes, making documentaries and features, but this has been huge since its launch back in September. It just seemed to be the definition of going viral from everything online. It's been all over the place, and there's a lot I want to get in and discuss. But a little bit about yourself, Ky. First, who is Ky Dickens and what does she do?
Yeah, historically, I've been a documentary filmmaker working around issues around social change, right? Like looking at paid family medical leave policies in America, or like our healthcare system in the States, or LGBTQ rights, like within the faith groups in the church. I mean, stuff like that. So this was a topic, the Telepathy Tapes was a topic, and kind of an area that I'd never, ever been into before, or created something around this type of kind of unexplained phenomena or space.
So listen, Ky, based on that, before we talk about the Telepathy Tapes, I want to ask you about your interest in the UFO topic, because here we are on a UFO podcast. What was that like growing up?
Yeah, it's nothing I had given much thought of. I remember in Sweden, my mom was born in Sweden, at one point sitting on a back deck with my great aunt. And she had looked up at the sky and said something and came in, and I was like, what happened? And my aunt that took me over to Sweden said, oh, she just saw a UFO. Apparently she sees them a lot over the lake. I remember that because that was the first time I had ever heard of an adult saying something like that. But it's nothing that I had thought much about, and it really wasn't an area of interest. And however, when I started discovering Dr. Powell's work, and I wanted to be a good steward and understand what was happening, I started to look into everything I could around consciousness. And that's where the UFO world kind of merged with what I was doing, because I think at its heart, to me, the overlap around all of this is what this has to do with our reality and consciousness. So that became something. And the other thing too is once I started realizing what was happening with what I was observing around telepathy and psi abilities, it made me sit back and say, wait a second, there's a lot of things that I might not have looked into or might not have given much, time investigating, that I need to reevaluate and reinvestigate and look into that I have just dismissed offhand. And I think ufology is one of those areas. And, I'm surrounded by a lot of friends who are, I think, great thinkers. And the producer of the podcast, Jen, was like, you need to get up to date in this world as well to understand how some of this stuff merges together, because it really is at the heart philosophy and consciousness and our fabric of reality.
Yeah, I agree with Jen on that one, and I think that'll bleed through the interview as we chat along. And I've always said this podcast isn't just about UFOs, but related phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
And telepathy and other psi abilities are certainly related. Both subjects are filled with evidence, including videos, but evidence that is widely scrutinized, often dismissed by the mainstream. Both are subjects that for many need to be experienced in some way, I think, to be believed. Both come with a huge stigma attached to them, and they both have a very human element attached that can often be overlooked. How similar do you now see the UFO phenomenon and likely other phenomena along with telepathy?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of similarities, and it's not necessarily right. Like the object of what you're talking about. Sometimes it's just scientists who have been researching this who are ridiculed. They can't get money to investigate it. They can't get far. They can't hold a chairmanship of their university if they're investigating something that's considered like outside of the baseline of materialism, right? And that's changed with UAPs. That's incredible. Or at least it's changing. But I think for people like Dr. Diane Hennessy Powell, Dr. Dean Radin, like a lot of folks who've been studying in psi activity and cognitive abilities that aren't explained by materialist science, they have suffered what people like, John Mack suffered, right? And so I think that was one parallel for sure. The other thing as well, as you said, is the experiencers, right? I mean, if someone experiences something and they know it to be true and it impacts their life and it changes their outlook, and nothing is the same after it happens, that's something. And when many, many, many people around the world are saying this about whether it's experiencing an encounter with a UFO or an encounter with some other type of being, or experiencing clairvoyance or telepathy or psi ability, you can't dismiss it, because that's the thing that I have learned is, we're so focused on quantitative evidence, right? Like, how are we measuring it? Where are the instruments? Where's the data? But qualitative evidence matters. And you have thousands, if not millions, of people experiencing things that are considered anomalous, but I actually don't think any of it is anomalous. This is all part and parcel of who we are in the world we live in. And it's just like we're waking up to realize all of that, I think. And a lot of it's converging at the same time.
Yeah, evidence can be very different to different people. I have never been to Canada, but I know it exists from the sheer volume of photographic evidence, video evidence, and people who have been there as well. But I'm sure there would be some who would disagree with that kind of outlook. Now, the origins of the telepathy tapes themselves, how did the project come about? You've mentioned Dr. Diane Hennessy Powell a few times there by name. I take it was her work in getting into that a big part of it?
Yeah, for sure. I had kind of gone through my own thing, which was that, just like to back up, as a documentary filmmaker, you're kind of like the poor stepchild, right? Of like the film world. Like, you're the nerdy one that like doesn't have flashy movies. You're kind of whatever. And so often to get a documentary off the ground, at least for me, I want to become an expert in what it is that I'm going to be talking about. There's often like sometimes months, if not years, of reading and research and interviews, so you can really become an expert and have a handle on what the story is before you start to tell it. And I had lost two friends in the prime of their lives that were really excellent, amazing people. And it kind of threw me through a loop where I just was angry. Like, okay, what the heck? Like, how do these people get snatched from the world? There truly is no meaning. There's truly no this. And I had a friend come over to bring flowers. And she's like, if you just start reading, I don't think you'd feel that way. I don't think you'd be so quick to think they're just snuffed out. And I thought, what? And this isn't like a religious-y friend. It was just a friend who's like, you need to start diving in and then you'll find the truth. And it felt so certain and confident. And I thought, okay, I'm going to start reading and researching. And I thought, whatever my next project is going to be, I want to answer this question of like why we're here or where we're going or what we are in a deeper way than I understand it, that I know the answers to that question now. Because I was going to do the work anyway. So I start reading, all of like Ian Stevenson's work. I started reading about plant communication and finding the mother tree, started reading, a lot of, Jacques Vallée. Just everything you can imagine around consciousness and what this reality is. Started listening to a podcast, Cosmos Anew. And that's when I heard the interview with Dr. Diane Hennessy Powell. And I thought, if this is true, there's implications that really change everything. So it felt kind of awkward, but I reached out to her and was like, hey, can I come up and see you and talk to you about maybe exploring this further? And I think after that first meeting, I realized that she's a legitimate, careful, thoughtful scientist who deeply wants to study this correctly. And that's kind of where the podcast starts. And
who is Dr. Powell then? Because she plays obviously a key role throughout the series.
Yeah. So Dr. Diane Hennessy Powell, she's a neuroscientist and psychologist. She studied at Johns Hopkins and was on the staff at Harvard. She's had an incredible career and started studying autistic savants at some point about 15, 20 years ago, thinking that maybe there was a key there to consciousness. And one of the strange comments that started coming from some of the parents that she was interviewing was, look, I'm not actually sure they're a savant. Like, I don't know if they've actually memorized every book on the shelf when I open a page and they can tell me what I'm looking at. Sometimes I wonder if they are just looking through my eyes or reading my mind. Well, that's a pretty wild thing for parents to be saying. But enough parents were saying things like that she did a few telepathy tests. And they were really remarkable, like 97% accurate when this person was behind a partition, that the child and, the telepathic sender was in a different room. A communication partner was, like I said, behind the partition. Like it was just really remarkable tests. And so she wrote a book called The ESP Enigma. kind of analyzing the data and talking about what the body of ESP research. And she had her license revoked for daring to suggest something like ESP is possible. She got it back, but she had to go through a bunch of psychological testing. It was traumatic. It was expensive. And stuff like that really harms scientists. It terrifies them. They don't want to do it. It's a huge cost. It's an expense. It can ruin your career. And so I think she's been pretty quiet and pretty kind of in the shadows until now. Now she's back.
Now her name's out there in a big way, so you've really brought her out into the public sphere now. You mentioned savant. So savants, traditionally for me, if I think of that, are young children who are 2 years old and can play Mozart symphonies with ease, and they've never really had lessons. They take naturally to an instrument. Or you have a 4-year-old kid who speaks 12 different languages and the parents don't, and it's just a natural gift or instinct for one particular thing. Is that about right? Or could you go into that in any more detail?
Yeah, I mean, I think savant skills are, expertise or incredible knowledge in an area where you haven't been taught or been exposed to, and so what's really interesting is, there's a very large misnomer that like all people with autism are savants. That's not true. It's about 10% of people with autism are savants. But I think one of the more interesting cases are accidental or acquired savants. And this often happens when people hit their head, have a head injury. There was a man who was mugged outside of a mattress store, in the States, I think about 15 years ago. I think this was in Colorado. No, he was a futon salesman. That's what it was. And he was at a karaoke bar, got hit in the head. And after that injury, he saw math and fractals everywhere, became like a math genius. There's many people who've had head injuries that suddenly can speak a language that they couldn't speak, or have unbelievable artistic or musical gifts. And so how do you explain that, right? You know something you shouldn't know. So one of Dr. Powell's key theories, and we talk about this in the Telepathy Tapes, is that science has come to understand and accept that savant skills are real, even though they can't explain them, that these things can happen. And so Dr. Powell's kind of hypothesis is, look, ESP should be considered a savant skill because people have knowledge that they should have no reason to know. Just like if you know music suddenly or know math and you have no reason to know it because you haven't been taught it or exposed to it. So this idea of ESP being a savant skill is, I think, like a crux of her work. If we can get it accepted in that way, it will be studied and it will be validated, and it won't be just this fringe thing any longer.
So the series follows the early episodes, especially autistic non-verbal children and their seemingly incredible abilities. It then follows on to speak with those involved with the children, including the parents, which as a parent myself, I found particularly interesting, a bit harrowing at times as well, because what they're going through. It speaks to teachers, carers, and then explores deeper the idea of consciousness. Now, is that an organic story for you? Is that how you planned this to look? Or is that just how it naturally came out as you researched it?
Yeah, I mean, the story I feel like was being baked for years, and it's kind of like what I took around pitching to try to get this turned into a docuseries, which never was, we didn't get it. Like we didn't find a partner. But that was sort of the thought that I was baking is like, look, first people have to understand that, I too was skeptical, and like bring people through this journey of like meeting all these different folks and understanding spelling and like the history of spelling and how spelling works and why it is that non-speaking individuals who can't talk because that's a fine motor skill, whereas pointing to letters is a gross motor skill. But that gets complicated with the idea that a lot of these folks can't feel their bodies because they have apraxia, which is a disconnect between mind and body. So I had to understand all that, and the audience did too. And that's like that's huge to unpack all that. And what started happening is I think I started building trust with the families. I think they were skeptical of me too. Like, they've been dismissed, ridiculed, not taken seriously for years around claims like this. So I think they're skeptical of anyone coming in. But as that trust formed, slowly they'd share more things. It wasn't just telepathy at first. It was also seeing or hearing from or communicating with other intelligent beings, or it was the ability to know things that are going to happen or know something happening in someone else's life, states a way that they've never met that we can verify, or, XYZ, a lot of different, quote unquote, what they would say are spiritual gifts. And I think for me, when I first started tumbling into this world, I was like so science minded, like, okay, I think if we can try to understand why and how telepathy is happening, and that's escalated, just like if you're deaf, your, sight might escalate, or your sense of taste, right? Like, oh, this makes sense. They can't talk. There's a different sense that's escalated. I was thinking of it all science. And then it was the parents and, well, no, more than that, the non-speakers that over and over were saying like, no, it's a spiritual gift. And I thought, well, what does that mean? Okay, so I'm missing something here. It's not just like a heightened sense. They're saying there's something more. And so then I was trying to unpack that. Does that mean we're more than our body? And if that is the case, then is that why you can have telepathy and clairvoyance and have a sense of past lives and time and traveling to other realms? Like, what is going on here? And I think the thing kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And so for me, it was bigger than just telepathy or a skill set. It became a conversation about consciousness. And that's where it ties to UFO stuff, because for a lot of people, it's like, no, this is bigger than just seeing something in the sky. It becomes about something that like engages with your life and is more about what our reality is and a testament to consciousness.
I was showing my 8-year-old son some of the videos from the website earlier. So having listened to the podcast, we meet Mia, Akil, Houston, and other children who have varying, I don't know if you say different abilities, similar abilities. There's talk of shared consciousness between child and parent. We see children doing, I suppose when I went in to watch or listen to the documentary initially, in my head, the experiments were similar to Bill Murray and Ghostbusters. I've always got that idea, he holds up the card and someone on the other side says star or square and it's correct or not. And that was my kind of understanding. But the experiments start off similar, but then they repeat so many times with the same result of it's correct, it's correct, it's correct, it's correct. There's multiple cameras set up to try and show all the different angles. We're not holding a mirror up. We're not having someone to the side holding a hand up. It was incredible to watch. What was it like being there and in the room as these children with their parents are, one, like you mentioned, that disconnect between their body not being able to articulate what they're thinking clearly and what's going on inside, but two, seeing those results happen time after time after time.
Yeah. I mean, the first time I saw it with Mia, and we say in episode 1 of the series that Mia's test, Dr. Powell instantly was like, these would never hold muster in science because that she's not far advanced enough in her spelling. So she was still being touched. But I knew that that's where she was at in her spelling because I'd been talking to the family on Zoom. We went out to dinner the day before. Anytime she spelled, her mom had to either like touch her knee or touch her head or touch, so once you're there, you're like, well, her mom's not sending codes through her head, but regardless, it doesn't hold up in science. So, but for me, experiencing that, I think everyone in the room, it was just like, oh my gosh, and like, I left there and I honestly think I had like 3 shots of whiskey and I do not do shots, but it was just like, I couldn't calm my body down to understand what had just happened. It felt like seeing a spaceship land on your lawn and someone get out. I mean, it was just that big. And, the next morning, Michael and I like went through all the footage to be like, wait, did we were we like not seeing this correctly? And that was like, oh no, this all really happened. And so that kind of shook me up. It's weird how quickly you can kind of forget about it, but like it started to crack my armor, of course. And then the next trip to see Akil was when he could type independently in a keyboard across the room under a blanket. He was telling us what his mom was seeing in a random image generator from a different room. I mean, that was so shocking that it changed everything in my life. And Michael, who is my camera guy, my DP, who's always skeptical. I mean, he was so shaken up, like at one point, and this is in the podcast, he's in the camera room charging the batteries and he was like shaking, head in his hands. And he said, do I have to believe in God now? And I was like, I don't know what this means, but it means that like, there's something more that we don't understand. And so seeing him being impacted was really, really special because like I knew someone, it helps it feel real, right? It's like seeing a UFO with someone else. Like if 2 or 3 people experience it for some reason, that makes it more credible. And Michael and I have filmed, like US senators together. Like we've done a lot of interesting, like quote unquote important work, but like this felt like epic, transitional, life shattering to experience with my colleague and good friend.
Yeah, the videos I'm talking about, for folks who maybe haven't watched it yet, it's an audio-based podcast. The video, and we'll get to talking about the next steps and everything and what you're trying to achieve. The video is available. You sign up and you do pay for that. It was like $9.99, but you're supporting the future work, the future project by doing so. And the videos really took me back. Again, as I say, as a parent watching these children and having had close family friends with non-verbal children with conditions that were life limiting, and yeah, that's kind of close to our family as well. So that was really harrowing, especially like in Akil, who he's trying to type, but he's clearly performing this incredible. I don't want to say performing a feat, but he's got this ability where he's telling you, the number that's on this sheet of paper that he couldn't guess by chance. He's doing it
Yeah.
over, but he
Yeah.
can't do something as simple. It's not simple for him to use his finger to press a key, and he mishits it, but he knows, and he's trying to verbalize it as well at the same time. And when people get wary of these results, these experiments don't always yield 100%, but the mid to high 90s is an incredible rate of success on anything. And I wonder, for anyone questioning that not being 100% each time, is it fair to say when we speak to each other verbally day to day, we don't always get everything the other person said? And that can be because of dialect, accent, outside factors like crowd noise.
Mhm.
The way we are speaking just now, does the signal drop out for a moment? But we still know what we're saying. We still get the gist of the conversation. And is it potentially the same with someone who's trying to communicate non-verbally or telepathically?
Okay, well, two things. Like, one is, spelling and communicating via letterboard, especially when it's difficult to control your body, it takes so much effort. It is so difficult that you're not going to go through that effort and say something inaccurate. And I came to be very, very like zoned in on that any non-speaking individual communicating with you is picking their words extremely intentionally. You don't just throw something away. It's not easy for them to spell. So, and some people get easier the more you control your body, right? Like every single case is different, but so that I was very clear that like what they're communicating is very meant to be. But then as far as like the tests, it's funny because I kind of made a decision, like, I think I have to say like 95, 97%. So it feels more real. But like a lot of what I was witnessing was 100% accurate, like over and over again. And that was the thing about being in that room, was that it was, and also like not knowing how to count that percent. Like if he slips and and he's trying to spell bath or something, and he actually smells like BATH. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
I guess we have to say that's 99%, even though he like corrected he can't control his finger as easily as all of us, but then corrects it right away. But being in the room, I think that was so wild, is I thought, okay, we'll do 20 tests. We did 20. And I'm like, and then you are like, okay, what, let's push the envelope. Okay, let's have a crew write a word. Okay. And then he does all these. Okay, let's have the crew write a word, then cross out a word and then add a new word and see if he can do it on the fly. And then he'd do that. And then it would be like, okay. Let's have him go over there and do it. And then he'd do that. And it's like, okay, can he do it verbally? And then he'd start doing it verbally. And then we'd be like, okay, now let's try a word generator instead of numbers. And then we do that. And then it'd be like, let's try random picture generator. And so I just kept getting greedier and greedier because it was so unbelievable. That's like, can we just keep pushing the envelope? And we did. And I don't think there was ever, from what I saw, a case where he wrote the wrong thing, like that we were looking at, except for one time when we had like a kind of a skeptical producer in the room who had just showed up and was like saying something into my ear. Like she didn't believe it. And then he just refused to participate. We were showing cues and he was just like, I'm not going to do it, And then I asked her to leave and then he was back at it. So the amount of consistency over and over, it's not like we had like 20 minutes a day, or it's not like it was like, oh, we did 50 tests and only 5 were good to choose from. And we put those on our website. I mean, I think we probably did in total like hundreds of tests and they were all accurate.
The technology we are using now, more and more to help us communicate, our language is being shaped by it. Our words are beginning to shorten. I say cool quite a lot, COOL, but I shorten it to KL on my texts. And I think a lot of people do something similar. We're regressing back to hieroglyphic style typing where we use emojis rather than writing the words out, again, because it's quicker. As technology we use now, including tablets, phones, Neuralink is something obviously that's starting to get more traction. Do you think that's taking us a step closer to not needing the physical tech and pushing us towards having these abilities wider scale? Or do you think the opposite, that it's removing our natural ability for needing them?
I mean, I think technology has kind of harmed our natural abilities more than anything, right? I think that, like, reading about kind of ancient Viking culture and, so many indigenous groups, being able to tap into these psi abilities, to hunt by knowing where people were, to remote view, like that type of thing was a matter of survival. You didn't have the ability to send a letter or to send a text message. So we relied on this more. It was so important in our survival and in our way of communicating and being human. And if you were to talk to a lot of groups that are still in touch with more of that, like, indigenous way of life, I think they would say, why are you even trying to study something that we know is true? Like, what are you doing? So I think technology has harmed us. And what's interesting is as technology changes, right? Like, even when you think about letters, right? Like, Mark Twain called it mental telegraphy, when people would write a letter to each other at the same time, where maybe you hadn't thought of each other in 5, 7, 10 years, and you send a letter to that person, and 5 days later you also get a letter, and it was postmarked the same day. You sent a letter on the same day. Mark Twain spent so much time talking about that, and now we have texts or phones, and it will be like, oh my gosh, I was literally just thinking about you when you called. Like, we get the inklings. We know that's still there, but I think what has erased our ability to do this is the leaps in technology. And what's so fascinating is, I've started this board of non-speaking advisors to kind of really help us keep our heads right on the right plane when it comes to, like, what happens next with the film, or what happens next with trying to create impact for them in their lives. And I brought up to some non-speaking individuals, like, okay, I'm getting emails from scientists who are saying they think they could help you communicate. Like, would you want that if there was like a Neuralink type thing, or a thing where you could look at the letters quickly instead? And the thing I've kind of received is, like, you're missing the point. Like, we don't want, I mean, some, you can't say for everyone, but the individuals I spoke to about this said, we don't want to come down to your level. The idea is for you to come up to ours. And I say this in episode, I think 8, and I love this moment, is when Caroline in England is explaining what it's like to have a telepathic link with her son versus using words. And she says, if someone were to say the word Thanksgiving, they said the word Thanksgiving, right? Which is an American holiday, but like, if you were to send them Thanksgiving through telepathy, you get the sound of football games, and you get this coldness outside, and the smell of turkey, and the laugh of your uncle, and sleeping in your old childhood bed with your boyfriend, or whatever it is, right? Like, you get the whole picture of it, and you feel it so deeply. And only through that type of, like, thought sharing is there a true, honest intimacy, right? Because you can't deceive. There's not white lies. How often do we not accurately answer, how you doing today? It happens all the time. So we're even, like, just sarcasm, things like that are just, like, not there when it comes to telepathy. And so I think the goal, honestly, it sounds wild, is to try to get to a space where more of us can engage in that type of deep, intimate communication.
Do you think then, in a Western society, particularly, substances like coffee, alcohol, tobacco, or medications we take regularly, maybe unnecessarily, are again hampering these sorts of things? Right now, Ky, I'm eliminating caffeine. Again, I was drinking a lot of coffee, as people who listen to the podcast will probably know. And I would get the afternoon jitters. You wouldn't feel focused, and you become reliant on it. And it just becomes a habit that, I don't know if I need this coffee, but I'm going to go get it because that's what I do at 9 o'clock in the morning after the school run. And I feel better for getting rid of it. I've got, like, a mushroom supplement I'm taking instead. Do you think all those sort of substances, again, take away from that, they detaches from that kind of natural element of what we should be?
Yeah. And I think, I think about Diana Pasulka and, like, the protocols that Tyler talks about and stuff in her book. And I think that stuff is true. Like, the more you can be in light and, eliminate, like, free radicals and stuff from your body, and get sleep and all that stuff. But what I would say from my work and the work I've done with non-speaking individuals and those working with that population is that the most important thing we can do to really get to a space, there's like 3 things. One is being able to clear your head, really just like being able to empty everything out. And that allows for, kind of like logging into a different, database, if you will, right? Like, you're less in your body. So knowing what you're feeling, because when we're all going to feel emotions. It doesn't matter what we're feeling, but knowing what we're feeling so we can resolve that. That's so important, because otherwise those emotions like boom, like ricochet through the world. They boomerang back to us. They're hurting all of us in a way. And we have to be thinking about the other. We can't just be thinking about ourselves. So clearing out those thoughts, clearing out those feelings, because not just our thoughts being heard and those become things, but our feelings are out there and are being felt by others as well. And then the third is truly what it all comes back to, which is so wonderful, because this is kind of like the basis of all world religions and spiritual traditions, is love and kindness. In episode 10, one of the non-speakers, Anthony, says kindness is the best way to evolve. And I have found that over and over and over again, that the basis of many of these gifts is love and acceptance and belief and kindness and pureness of intention. And they just don't manifest without that stuff, which is so cool, because there's so many people wanting to like access this in a greater way. And of course, like how cool, right? To really engage with this like superhuman part of ourselves. But to do it, like we're going to have to start treating ourselves and those around us with more generosity and love. So it's really calling us all to evolve in this beautiful way.
So and you've done it wonderfully, bring this back to UFOs quite often with some of the names you've dropped in, so people will appreciate that. In episode 6, one of your guests, forgive me, I didn't take a note of the name. The idea of the brain being a receiver, she talks about it being like a smartphone, that some people can access certain apps that others
That's Dr.
can't.
Powell, yeah.
Was it Dr. Powell? Yeah,
Mhm.
there was a couple of clips at the same time, and I wasn't sure. A gentleman spoke just before or after, and I think I was driving.
Oh, yeah. No one's gonna know this. Like I'll be like, oh, this who said that? Like, but I don't expect anyone else to know those.
No, that's all right. Just that people think I'm being lazy here. But yeah, so people like being like a smartphone, some people can access certain apps, others can't, and I really like that analogy. But to carry that on, could it be that there are then different network providers for these smartphones, so we're not all getting it from the same source, and what we consider maybe gods, aliens, or higher intelligences? Is that something you've considered?
Yes, I have considered that, and that's a great question, right? Because I think regardless, like this download idea. So Tyler D, again, who's in Diana's book, right? He talks about being able to get downloads from what he thinks are like intelligent beings that are helping him understand great scientific breakthroughs, and he's become a very wealthy man doing that. Like, what is that? Like some of the non-speakers in my podcast talk about going to the realms, or there's a library of information where they can get information about anything in the world. And what is that? Is that the Akashic record? Is it this collective consciousness like stream in which everything is built? Is it a being, right? Is it God? Like, what is it? Or is it like engaging with like a different dimension where like everything is that? I mean, I don't know. But then you talk about like creators, like, there's that book, Big Magic, which people should read if they want just a fun, amazing read. And it's about the creative process and how things get downloaded. And if you miss it, then it will go to someone else, and full songs that people have like decided not to write, they hear on the radio 4 months later. So this is talked about in so many different circles that there's a truth to it. I've experienced it where you get a full download of a story or something. So I don't know. I don't know if there's different frequencies, but this idea of like when you get to a certain frequency, like that there's some interaction with some other beings of some sort. It's a common theme that comes up over and over again. And I think that's the question too, is like, what is it? What do you even call it? Like, is it just a consciousness form that you're like hearing from and seeing? Is it a holographic universe and this thing is being popped in by some other consciousness? Is it an angel? Is it an extraterrestrial? Is it an interdimensional being? Are they all the same thing? I mean, I have no idea. It's above my pay grade, but I know a lot of people are working on this and thinking of it,
It really interests me, and just that idea again, like I say, of different network providers, I'll just use for now because I like stuff simple. But my wife, I only found out recently, we've been together 11 years. When she thinks, she can't visualize in her head what she's thinking of. Whereas I can say to her, no, I'm thinking of the street that I used to live in and I'm walking down it just now, I'm touching a wall, etc. She can't do that. She's like, no, in my head, it's just blank. I'm thinking it, but I don't see anything. And that amazed me that people didn't always see things. So is it that her brain works a certain way and mine's works a certain way, and you can't train them to work exactly the same way, and they're just very different operating systems? You know, one's Android, one's Apple.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's so fascinating. I love that you and your wife had that conversation. What a cool conversation just to get to know
I
each
don't know
other.
why it came up. I think she was ridiculing me for. I think she was asking me what you can see things when you think, and I was like, "Yeah, everybody can." She was like, "No, you can't." And yeah, so yeah, we're not always that fun, but yeah.
It's really sweet. And I was more like you know, and I'll talk to friends or people who have a constant talk track in their head, you know, and often it's like negative talk. And I don't do any self-talk. I don't even know what people are talking about when they talk about that. Cause I'm like, what? You talk to yourself, like you say things to yourself, like you
All day.
and like to me, I was like, what? I don't even get that. Like, and you would say something bad to yourself. Like, I mean, but I know that's part and parcel of so many people's operating system, like you said, you know, and I don't visualize things like that. Like I can sort of visualize the street I grew up. I knew there's a hill. I knew we had a red mailbox. I remember like the step, but it's like fragmented. It's not clear. So it's fascinating. It's really cool.
Yeah, brains are funny things. And my big takeaway from the telepathy tapes, and I was looking through the comments on Spotify when I listened to it, to see what people were saying and what their takeaways were from different aspects as it kind of went along. My big one was this idea of the hill. Now, I'll let you, because it's your baby. Do you want to talk about the hill, what it is, and who introduced it in the series?
Yeah. So the series really does unpeel an onion in the way that I experienced this world. And one of the things that really shocked me when I was leaving Akil's house is he said something along the lines of, all non-speakers have this gift. And I thought, well, that's a major claim, right? Like I'm always afraid of words like all and every and never. And then when I met the next group that I was going to go visit in Atlanta, Georgia, on that first Zoom call with a few of the parents, they were like, well, you know, Houston, this young individual who's a non-speaker, says his mom said, you know, Houston says all non-speakers and unreliable speaking individuals have this gift at varying degrees. And she's like, they even will tune into a channel that they call the Talk on the Hill, where it's like a telepathic chat room. They can kind of like, I don't know how it works, but connect and communicate and share and affirm and help each other. And this place is a very enjoyable place. And that was like, what? You know, but at this point I'd seen telepathy tests, like 4 days of telepathy tests with Akil on Mia. So I was like, oh yeah, okay. I'm not going to throw anything out. And then when we went to Georgia, I met one of Houston's friends, John Paul, who he said he loved going to the hill, would put pillows on his head in order to like close out all the, almost like going into deprivation chamber helps our gifts heighten. He would need to like kind of close out a lot of stuff so he could access the hill. And he formed a relationship with his girlfriend on the hill. And when I left Atlanta, I think the way I said it in the podcast was like I wasn't fully formed on what the hill was. Like, was it just like these few friends had it and they could just go there, or like, what is this? And where I was shocked to my core was twice. Like before I released the telepathy tapes, I had just been introduced to a teacher in Chicago. We were in conversation and she mentioned the hill. And I was like, wait, what do you mean by the hill? And she's like, I don't know. A few of my students say they go there to communicate and I don't know what that means. And then I thought, what? And then like a few months later, podcast, I think only episode 1 was out. So no mention of the hill is out in the ether. I meet a minister from a mega church in Arizona. He's telling me about his experiences with telepathy among his, youth ministry with, kids with special needs or whatever. And he was telling me how some of them have mentioned the hill. And now it's like, what? And then I had this, another family who lives in Israel. And that man has told me that, his son also has a hill kind of there, but it's more like just for the Jewish community. And then talking to other friends or families and teachers, then I found out, oh yeah, there's kind of that type of hill thing in Arizona. And there's also a hill thing in Florida. And there's various hills around the world, but like, you can tune into any of them. And I was like, what is happening? So enough information. And, just recently I talked to a researcher, a doctor who found really instrumental, life-changing integration type solution for a lot of kids with apraxia, where your mind and body don't connect, and often it's a result of having this like really a high level of autism. And this lotion was like the ingredients for it came from a boy who told them what he discovered on the Hill regarding how to like help integrate the mind and body and like create some more comforts around their physical situation. So the Hill keeps coming up. At this point, I have no doubt that this is a real thing. And why wouldn't it be? We can tune in with a CB radio. That's not weird. With our computers, we can tune in, jump into a chat room, you know? So the idea that you could all connect in a certain room together with your minds, why not? We've created technology that can do that, you know?
It made me think going along about when people have near-death experiences and they see a quote-unquote afterlife and they meet passed away relatives and friends and pets and things like that. And it made me think, is that just going back to a source? If we hear so often about death isn't a thing, it's just like the next step and whatever that may be. And if your consciousness, and we're talking about the idea of consciousness being non-local, the brain's just a receiver, is this Hill just these people with these gifts and abilities are able to access this realm or place, whatever you want to call it or label it as, without having to have that experience of passing on, because their brain isn't locked into this body they've got because of an issue?
Yeah, and that's one thing I've tried to explain to people is like I don't think this is about autism at all. I think it's about not being connected to the body. And this has come up over and over and over again, that often people who are diagnosed with what is considered like severe autism, where you're non-speaking, what they really have is apraxia, where your mind and body do not connect. And you could be telling your body to do something and it won't listen. You could want to speak and show, yes, I want to go to the Mexican restaurant, but like as you enter, you walk out the other way. And it's so frustrating. It's so frustrating. But because of that, many of these individuals will say, like, I didn't even know I had a body. I can't feel my fingers. I can't feel my feet. And in fact, when many of them start spelling, that's one of the reasons they need to be touched at first, is even if the pan goes away right after, it's just to be like, oh, here's your body. Like, here's your wrist, you know? And quite often one of the things they say is like, I need heavy boots, or I need like a big necklace, so I always know where my chest is or my feet are. And so you can imagine if you're not residing in your body, where you're feeling separate from everyone, where you're feeling, that's it, separate from everyone. And instead you're they're existing, but they just don't know they're in, you know, they don't know where their body is a lot. So I think that ability to exist elsewhere, more in a consciousness plane or soul plane, depending on how you interpret the world, is the key to accessing what isn't physical.
Would you be tempted to, and it's sort of touched on later on under different labels, but look at abilities such as remote viewing as part of a future series? Because so much of what's discussed throughout the series, it's like it's going in those sorts of directions. And you can give these things all different labels as well, about predicting the future, remote viewing. And for those who may be unaware, remote viewing is the ability, for example, to be able to, I could, in my mind right now, see what's on Ky's desk in an envelope, and it would be a letter saying, "Hi Andy, here are some lovely pictures of flowers," and I can see that in my mind. People have used these things to find the nuclear submarines out in the ocean, things like that. So all these different abilities sort of come under one umbrella, and I wonder, what's your take on that kind of remote viewing side of things?
Yeah, I mean, I think remote viewing is, again, like hand in hand with, you know, quote unquote telepathy. And to your point, we know it's real. The CIA was heavily invested in this at the Stanford Research Institute with projects like Project Grill Flame and Stargate, where they had people like Uri Geller and others remote viewing, you know, things around the world, things in closed boxes, right? And having to draw pictures of objects they couldn't see. And they were accurate. And not all the time, but they were accurate enough that it was reliable to help find a downed aircraft, like you said, or submarines or hostages, you know. So we know that remote viewing is an aspect of this. And I think that remote viewing, like one of the teachers that I have worked with, she has said, like, I think the remote viewing is easier for these. I mean, as easy as telepathy. Like that should be just as much discussed, you know? And it's been funny just because working on the project, like there was one time where one of the moms was writing me over and over all morning, like needed me for something. And I was so busy, and I was on back-to-back calls and Zoom calls where I couldn't look at my phone. And then I had like 10 minutes between calls, and I like walked out of my home office and into the kitchen, and this mom calls me and she's like, "Oh, good, I got you." And I was like, "That was perfect. Like I just walked out in lunch." And she's like, I know. Houston told me, like, he said that you just left your office. So it was like, okay. So yeah, I mean, remote viewing is part and parcel to the gifts that many of these individuals have, you know.
There's
And the
such a
other
lot.
thing about remote viewing, I just want to say is, like, many people can do it. Like there's remote viewing classes where just anyone off the street can go in and learn to do this. And I think they're shocked that by going through the lessons and protocols, they can do it.
Yeah, absolutely. If people want to learn more about remote viewing, I've done a few episodes on it, and most recently with Russell Targ, who worked at that Stanford Research Institute you mentioned way back, and he was one of the main guys involved, and fascinating life he's led as well. So check that one out. The podcast as a whole has such a lovely message, a really nice tone to it, some wonderful messages and ideas come from the nonverbal people themselves. However, at any point, did you come across or look at the dangers of telepathy, the potential dangers of telepathy, or the potential for it to be manipulated?
Yeah, I mean, of course, you know, the only people that I'm serving in this are the non-speakers and their families, right? Like I'm not going to put something out there if they don't want it out there. And we have a lot of conversations around this, you know, and I think for them, it's like the truth is so critical, because if these individuals are hearing the thoughts of their teachers who are thinking terrible things about them and the rest of the world, and like, that's important for people to know. If you're communicating with them, knowing that you could influence them by thinking something, that's big. Like you have to clear your mind so that spelling can be an accurate, like pure form coming directly from the person. And so getting the news of telepathy out there is really important, I think, to so many teachers and parents and non-speaking individuals. And this idea of like, could it be used for nefarious means? And my thought on that, and I think every single person involved in the podcast would agree, the non-speakers aren't gonna use their gifts for nefarious means. Like this is something that comes with love, and it's about connection, and it's about intimacy and survival in some cases. And accessing education and friendship when you can't with the body that you've been given. So it's not about like winning the lottery. Like you're not going to go to Vegas and get a non-speaker to give you numbers. Like, I think like the people engaged with them would never even ask that, like ever. And so, and I think, so you can't use them. You just can't, because they won't engage. They're the individuals with competence, and they're just not going to engage. So I'm not worried about that. And then other people have said, "Oh, I don't want people knowing what's in my mind." And that's scary, because if it is scary, right? If you're keeping secrets, if you're a government and you are trying to lie to people, or corporations and you're trying to mislead people, yeah, you don't want people knowing your thoughts. But I think that's a challenge for all of us, right? Like if we can purify our thoughts, it's not scary for someone to be in them. Right? Like, of course, you're going to have moments where you're like, oh, that person's so annoying, or like, I don't like her shirt, or whatever. Like, we're all human. Like, you're going to have little moments that are like that. But I think that if you are trying to live in such a way and you are working to change your thoughts, it doesn't become as scary of people being in them. You have to just be willing to do the work to change them. And on that too, I just want to say that like, and almost all non-speakers that I've talked to have said like kindness is the best way to link up, like love and good vibes. Sometimes what they've said, like there has to be some sort of like intimacy and permission, right? Like if you're going to kind of engage in that. And I do think that like people younger and maybe people less, like, I think for some non-speakers in the beginning, it's really intense, and they say they can hear all the thoughts or many thoughts or like loud thoughts, so they don't know whose thoughts are coming at them. But I think when it comes to like making a choice of like, I'm going to like, share the space of someone's mind, I do think there is a bit of like a loving intimacy that causes that to happen. It's not that invasive as people might be afraid of.
Yeah, absolutely. And my thoughts pardon the pun, aren't necessarily about the non-speakers having any ill will or bad intentions. But you mentioned the Stanford Research Institute, and you mentioned things like Project Stargate, and what the elements of the US government or military are trying to do literally was an army of psychic spies. And there's a fantastic movie, The Men Who Stare at Goats, which is largely based on a true story. People should go and watch it, with George Clooney and whatnot. But there are people who would look at this sort of ability and think we could use that for ill gain, for military purposes, for weaponization. I think that's just the nature of the world we live in. So not necessarily non-speakers, but the potential that they could either be manipulated by folks like that. And one of the questions from the listeners gets into a little bit of that conspiratorial nature. But like you say, I suppose it's a relief that you hear that it's got to come from a place of love, kindness. It's got to be a two-way street, you know, and that side of it. So that's really interesting.
Yeah. And I think for a lot of us who have these kind of anomalous psi experiences, you can't control when it's going to happen, but it often is tied to trauma or love. You know, like I forgot the story of the man who invented the QEEG. The reason that happened was because he was like I think he was doing army drills and was thrown off of his, I don't know what carriage horse thing like he used back then, and was almost trampled by horses. And his sister freaked out because she saw it. She saw all of it and was worried he died. And when he called, I don't know if she was a phone, but when she was able to get in contact with him and explain what she had seen, he was so completely freaked out that like he wanted to study this, and out of that came the QEEG. And so like these stories are peppered throughout history in a very significant way, but it's tied to love, right? Like you're about to lose someone. So when you love is about to be harmed, like boom, it like pumps into your head. We've all heard so many stories like that, right? Like you didn't know someone was dying, and then all of a sudden they're in your dream, like saying goodbye. And so I don't know if it's often like can be controlled. And I know for the remote viewers, there's a wonderful book by Annie Jacobson about this called The Phenomena. And it was all about the declassified CIA studies around the remote viewing program we did in the United States. And the remote viewers were often like, good, right. And they needed positive feedback. We all do. If you're making a bunch of great baskets and someone's like, oh, no, who cares? You know, if you make 10 3-pointers, it kind of sucks. And you're like, not going to try as hard, you know, but people wouldn't give them feedback often and would just want them to keep going, but they didn't know if their targets were right, if what they were saying was right. And I think this kind of work, like you do need love and positive feedback, and they would get exhausted and not be able to perform as well. And I think that's one of the things that was frustrating to the military is, right, they want to create like machines that are like reliable over and over and over again. So if these remote viewers were like reliable sometimes, and then they would get tired and then they like couldn't do it. But what they were saying is like, I need rest to do this. I need encouragement. I need to know if I'm hitting my marks. And so I don't think we can treat this like we do like other types of, skills. It's not as robotic. I think there is this like organic, quote unquote, spiritual element to it that requires like nourishment, kindness, love, and space to clear your mind.
Before we finish up with some listener questions, because there are a lot and we won't get through a quarter of them with the time we have left, what do you think the impact would be on science and the wider public if it can be proven without a doubt as a species that telepathy is real?
Well, yeah, okay. So, I mean, I think it will have a big impact on us because we'll realize that our paradigm is incorrect, because in the scope of a current materialistic paradigm where all these physical elements, right, like physics, biology, math, et cetera, like kind of is there first, and that creates consciousness. If consciousness can't be seen or measured, and these things that materialism tells us are impossible are possible, then it means our paradigm needs to be rethought. And as we talk about in the show, not the entire paradigm, like a lot of the materialist paradigm is incorrect, but the way it is right now is we see, material as the base of the pyramid that creates everything. And consciousness is at the tiny top of the pyramid, and we can't explain where it's there. What I'm presenting in the show is like, no, and this isn't my idea, this has come before me, this idea that consciousness is fundamental, that like consciousness is the base of the pyramid. Our consciousness comes first, and everything in our physical world has become the result of that. And the only way psi is possible is if consciousness is fundamental, because then it explains everything. And then it means that all like clairvoyance, remote viewing, even things like telekinesis, energy healing, telepathy, all that's possible if our world is more mental, right? All of it is. And so what I'm hoping to do, my goal has been a paradigm shift. I believe that consciousness is fundamental because I have seen these things happen and you have to account for them. So consciousness can't be the top of the pyramid because we don't know how it exists, but all of these things are accounted for if consciousness is the bottom of the pyramid. So I think proving this stuff will help us clearly identify that our paradigm is incorrect.
The way I can understand that, would it be like internet was here before everything else, and then we had to make the computers to access it, as opposed to us using the internet afterwards? So the internet's there, it's a source. This information's everywhere. It can be under the ground, a bit like Avatar, I suppose, with all the blue stuff.
Yeah.
And then we have to build these computers and ways to access it. It's a little bit like that, and the consciousness is just there. That's the main thing. That's the ever present.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is it.
Okay. So, where do we start with these questions then? You've mentioned a couple of them there, I think. So Dylan says, now that Ky has seen psi phenomena firsthand, what other phenomena regarded as woo does she suspect to be true?
Yeah, the most simple one for me in the making of this was crystals and rocks. I always kind of discounted that as like, oh, people want to believe in that. So that helps them, just like the placebo effect, right? You want to believe something and it helps you. And so I didn't believe that to be true until Houston had an experience. Well, his mom, who's actually like a very evangelical Christian. So she completely never wanted rocks or crystals in their house, like anything like that felt new agey. I think she just didn't appreciate, and so she left a massage once with a bag of crystals and rocks that the massage therapist gave her. And, Katie went and put it in her primary bathroom, which was behind a door, inside the bedroom and etc. So anyway, Houston gets home from school and charges upstairs, run through the bedroom door, then through the bathroom door, grabs the rocks and was so excited to have them, and then went and put them in his bedroom and lined them up next to his head. And she was just blown away and was like, what is happening? And he was explaining that rocks have energy and he can feel them. And each one has a different vibrational energy and he can feel each one specifically. And then I went and looked that up. Do rocks have your own vibrational energy? And it was true. And then I heard more and more stories like that from families. So then it was like, oh, this thing I discounted completely is possible, And so that was a very tangible one. And I think, this idea of consciousness being fundamental, that we exist before our body, I think became really apparent to me in a scary, amazing way, because so many non-speaking individuals I've met have said that they remember being in the womb or right beforehand, or explaining things from when they were babies. And it's like, how, unless your consciousness is so fully formed that you're just in a new body, but your consciousness isn't new. And so that was a pretty shocking thing to encounter as well.
You mentioned in the last thing you said, telekinesis. Was that ever something you experienced, anything like that with any of the nonverbals?
It's something I've heard parents and teachers talk about, and I haven't experienced it or witnessed it firsthand, which is why I don't feel comfortable putting it in the show yet. It's something I want to try to see. Can I validate this? And if I can validate it, I will put it in there. It's just that I haven't. But again, enough people have anecdotally told me that it's something that they've experienced.
No, that's fair enough. I had so many questions from people about the hill. So here's one from Jonathan, who asks about 50 questions in one. So grab your notepad here, Ky, okay? So at various points throughout the podcast, the hill is described as a zero-dimensional space and as a hill of thoughts. This seems like something that is hard to visualize for folks who have not experienced a space like this outside of our known space-time environment. And I know there are plans to work with artists to help visualize these types of things in the forthcoming documentary. But have you developed a consensus picture of what the hill looks like in the abstract? How do people identify with each other when one person speaks? Is it broadcast to everyone? Are private conversations possible on the hill? Lastly, it appears there are several hills people can access, such as you've mentioned, one in Israel, etc. Are these fully separate or bound by cultural context? So there's a few different ideas in there, but I suppose it's, what do you think of this overall idea of the hill and how that works?
Okay, well, I think a lot of these questions will be answered. We're doing this bonus episode with Dan, who's my friend that accessed the Hill. And that's really what was so weird to me, because he's like a colleague who was like a producer that went through some illnesses and it really changed his life, reached out to me to help on the project, to help on the telepathy tapes. And I'm like, don't help me, go work with non-speakers if you really want to be moved. And he did. And it's really changed his life. And he's witnessed all this, the telepathy and remote viewing firsthand now, but he also has been to the Hill many times. And actually, just before I got on with you, he's like, I need to give you more updates. I've learned more. And so that episode is going to be very helpful to you. But I think to answer some of your questions, it does, I don't know all the answers, but I know from what Dan experienced was that like people would come to him and it was all audible. It wasn't visual. And he would have people say this and this, and, you know, and so he had these like intimate conversations with people that were individual, and that people would come to him one at a time. And that was made it like bearable. But again, like, what's it like for a non-speaking individual? I'm not quite sure. It's like, we can all 10 of us sit in a room and have a conversation, right? You're not all talking at once, or you could like look at someone and have a side conversation. So I would imagine it's a bit like that, knowing that I've heard that like Houston has said he's a teacher on the Hill and that he'll often give lessons. So that means that like someone can speak and a lot of people can listen. You know, and then I've also, as we heard in that one episode, I believe it was 6 or 7, where a non-speaking individual in Maria's classroom says like he likes to go there to talk about bees and time travel, and he'll talk to someone from, you know, Denmark and someone from this area. So clearly you can also go and seek individual people out. The other question that I have is like, okay, is the Hill then just like a catchphrase for like being able to link up with one person, or is it actually like this like big monumental chat room that you go to? Because I do think both are happening. And what has evolved from this, because it's not a word I have ever used, is a lot of teachers kind of in the field are reporting back that their students are calling this thought sharing, and that they are asking for time to thought share now, or thought share with one another, or that they have thought sharing appointments with a friend at a certain time. And so I think that thought sharing is different than the Hill, where people can massively gather and communicate. So I don't have all the answers yet, you know, and I hope to continue to unfold them. And like he said in the documentary, that is one of the goals, is to work with non-speakers to really depict what this Hill looks like, as well as these realms. And if you're not connected to your body, like let's say if I'm meditating or someone's meditating and accesses the Hill, like, is it just audible because we're still so connected to our body? But for them, or for some people who aren't as connected, then is it also visual? You know, those are questions I don't know.
Yeah. No, that'll be interesting. Look forward. Any dates for the bonus episode? Any timescales?
Yeah. Yeah. So what has been happening on our end is like the emails have been so wonderful, because people have so many questions and so many thoughts, and it's like impossible to even answer them all. So that's when I was like, maybe we just should do something between seasons called like the talk tracks, right? Where we can like have guests or explore some of these questions. So we're going to start that in January. The Dan episode, I hope to release the January 13th, around then. Then we're going to do a Q&A with a bunch of the families and Dr. Powell and Susie Miller and some of the teachers. So right now on our social media channels, my assistant Catherine has asked people for questions that they want to ask them. So, you know, that's going to be great. We'll do this Q&A. Yeah, so hopefully the talk tracks will unfold some of this. And I can maybe see if Dan would do a talk track where he answers a lot of these questions, maybe with Lily, who's a non-speaker who also goes to the Hill. So based on this conversation, I'll see if we can get that going.
You might need that, because like I say, the list of questions I have, and I only put this out less than 2 days ago to say you were coming on, because I thought it would be popular and I didn't want to get overwhelmed with it. So if my inboxes are that busy, I can't imagine what yours is like with a #1 podcast. So Florian asks, have these non-speaking children shown any ability to connect with animals? Some animals might be capable of such connections. For instance, it's said that dogs can sense when someone decides to come home. I can attest to that, because quite regularly my wife will phone me when I used to drive more to the office, and she'd be like, are you near? And I would always be at a certain place, probably still about 2 minutes drive from the house. And she would be like, the dog is going mental and he's running to the window in the back door. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not far. So that 100% happens. And I've seen it happen with when my wife's not too far away either. And Florian also said, love the tapes and greetings from Germany.
That's wonderful. Yes, and we're actually having an animal telepathic teacher on, her name is DT Young, coming on the talk track soon, and she has worked with like I think the Danish Olympic team who does dressage. I can never say that, dressage with horses.
Yep.
And I think maybe someone from like the Royal Horseback Group and maybe another Olympic team from Europe who has worked to telepathically link with their horses. I have talked to not so many, but like at least 6 non-speakers who talk about like telepathic links with horses. And I think that's why horse therapy is so, I mean, it's really a powerful, not just with people with autism, but with PTSD. So there is something that happens with humans and horses. I think certainly with dogs and cats. And then I think there's certain animals where there's nothing in there. And actually, Katie and Houston have a funny story. I think it was them where they were on vacation somewhere. And as you do, like they were showing the people that they were staying with, like, yeah, Houston can read minds. Check this out, blah, blah, blah. And the family they were with was like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. What's a dog thinking? And then Houston spelled, he's not smart. So I think some animals are consciously evolved that we can link with, and maybe some are just more not so much.
Here's a question from Russell, and I'm thinking folks will have listened to the tapes in full and loved it. Some folks won't have got to it yet or be unsure. Other folks may be like Russell, who says, I've listened to the first 3 episodes, very intriguing. However, from a scientific perspective, would the phenomenon gain greater acceptance if a recognised test could be performed and repeated to gain wider acknowledgement rather than the anecdotal examples I've heard so far?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's our number one goal, right? Is to help Dr. Diane Powell do these university-backed tests with, scientists. They'll be peer-reviewed, written up in journals. And that's been her goal for 20 years. It's just been impossible to get it funded because just like people studying UFOs and such, it's really hard to get anything on the fringes of society like this accepted as fundable, grantable research. So thankfully, due to the exposure of the telepathy tapes, that funding is coming in. We're talking to 2 different universities right now. Most likely the experiments will either be done at University of Virginia or University of Arizona. We're working hard to find right now non-speakers who can communicate independently or with a communication partner that's separate from the person they're telepathic with. And then the goal is to put, the telepathic pair, one in person in a Faraday cage. So our hope, absolutely, like that's the laser focus, is to get this research done. And that was kind of the point of the podcast, was to get the funding for the research, to make the documentary, to present this research to the world. So the telepathy tapes is like step 1. It was to open minds, open hearts, get the funding for the research, show what's going on, what these parents are saying. But in no means was that intended to be like a scientific study. I'm a storyteller. That wasn't like the buttoned up science. This was to be like, hey, you guys, this is important. We should fund this science. That's what that was. And I think we've accomplished it.
David asks, has Ky ever heard of the government taking any children to work on secret programs? This is something Ross Coulthart has alluded to within the last few months. And also, has Ky had any pressure from government or intelligence agencies not to release her information?
No, I've not had any pressure from the government yet, but there are some strange like Zoom calls and requests coming in from people that just seem to be wanting to insert themselves and know more, and like offering to take over my phone calls and correspondence. And I'm like, why would I do that? So some of that's weird, but I'm just trying to be like very careful. The thing that makes me sick to my stomach is the thought of anything bad ever happening to the families who have struggled their entire lives to take care selflessly of these, of individuals who need 24/7 care and time and love. And I have not heard of anything bad happening to any of non-speaking individuals. I think it's very hard for the government to, anything is possible. I haven't heard of anything bad happening yet. No. And that keeps me up at night. So, we are working really hard to protect everyone.
Which is good to hear. Kevin asks, were UFOs ever particularly discussed with the kids, or just the notion of visitors, entities, angels, etc.?
Yeah, well, they talk about non-human intelligence a lot, right? So other beings, and some will talk about interdimensional beings and the ability to converse often with interdimensional beings. I do think there is a lens in which the information gets filtered, and that's the cultural lens in which we all live. So, um, I don't, there is a lot of talk about angels. I actually think that's a separate being. And that was one of my big cognitive dissonances. I think for me, like organized religion has always been a very scary thing. I've seen how much damage it's done to individuals and people and countries and cultures and with control and, so there's a lot of elements of organized religion that have scared me. And I feel like I didn't know how to categorize angels, right? But like so many non-speakers have talked about those as like a distinct thing. And then there are a lot of non-speakers talking interdimensionally. I've never heard like something about like someone coming from a distant outer space planet, but communicating interdimensionally easily. And they talk about being able to access and have those conversations by tuning into different vibrations or raising to a different vibration. And you know what I can do at some point? Maybe I'll do this as a talk track, because Anthony, who is Marianne's student, it's like Marianne Harrington was a teacher who's worked with kids for a long time, and Anthony is one of the students she works with a lot. And Anthony sent a long thing to be released in episode 9, and it was so long I couldn't include it all. But he talks a lot about interdimensional conversations with various beings. And he also does say that what we're doing here on Earth is of deep consequence to other beings, that they're very concerned about what we're doing. And that has left me scratching my head around, okay, does that mean like we're all these dimensions just stacked on Earth? So if like one of us blows it up, it's going to harm all of them? Or is it that like all places where life exists are somehow linked, and I don't have the answers on that.
It's an interesting conversation and route to go down. And I know we're starting to run out of time, so we'll start wrapping up, Ky. Final email from Scott. Your podcast series moved me, and I shared it with my wife, my children, and my cousin, who has an adult son with severe unreliable speaking autism. Some of the skeptics on social media have pointed out that Dr. Powell's medical license was suspended, not for the content of our book, but for more mundane reasons, including extensive use of telephone consultations. I assume you researched this extensively. Can you please explain more fully what you learned about the circumstances of the suspension? Thank you for your series and for your open-minded and compassionate approach to the subject.
Yeah, and I think that's a great question. And, it's interesting because having talked to Dr. Powell about this, but also other scientists who've reached out, like kind of in support of her, filling our inboxes, so many of them will say, we all have bad records or talk on the phone or do this. Like you could dismiss and remove and fine any medical professional, because everyone seems understaffed and doesn't have enough time to do the paperwork. It doesn't have enough time to do the insurance stuff. It doesn't have enough support to have a front office staff or whatever it is. So overwhelmingly, people have said that is an excuse to come after someone. You can't probably ethically come after them and say, oh, we don't like what you said and talked about in the book you released, because that seems like censorship, right? And I think the power structures that kind of rule the materialist paradigm, which is the conversations we have in media and academia, probably know better than to make it look like censorship. So yeah, I think it's pretty clear that, oh, you released this book, we don't like that. You take bad notes, we're going to fine you in California and this one and that one and that one. Like, why did they start looking at that with a microscope? And as like I said, like so many scientists have reached out and said, this is part and parcel of, or even psychologists and therapists have said they could do that to any person in practice right now. The choice is, why did they decide to do it? What was the impetus to put someone under a microscope to find a reason to find them? So I think that's the question.
Yeah, you don't have to look too far than David Grush, where very quickly after his statements to Congress, he was allegedly discredited by a journalist for having PTSD and history of domestic violence. And those files came up incredibly quickly, where these FOIA requests tend to take months or years to come out. And I think that was days a journalist had, who that said journalist then got discredited. So, but yeah, listen, I did have to cut out about 8 pages of questions, Ky, and I appreciate you have one of the biggest podcasts on the planet, so are very busy, but I'd love to get you back on when the new podcast, the bonus episodes come out. That'd be great. If you want to finish up though, just mentioning folks what is next, because the telepathytapes.com has the videos. It has a lot of information on there about the plans, but do you want to just kind of verbalize that for us?
Yeah. So we're fundraising through March 5th is when I'm just going to cut it off and be like, okay, this is what we have. Because, we have some private donors coming forward, which is awesome, or, investors and that type of thing. So starting in March is when we'll start like activating on the documentary full time. I plan to film that throughout this whole year and then release it in January, or not in January, in 2026 sometime when it's done. We will keep you posted on that thoroughly on social media. Like Mia is the young girl from episode 1 is now spelling independently. So we'll post videos as we go see her and stuff like that. So that film Dr. Powell's storyline will be fleshed out and ending and culminating in her, awesome tests that are going to be university backed. So thrilled about that. We're releasing the talk tracks just to try to help satiate this like real curiosity about what all this means. So that will start rolling out here next. Like those are kind of start popping into your feeds in January. And then, season 2, my approach to these seasons, I want to be like really thoughtful, deep investigative, like documentary style storytelling, not cut and run. And, it's expensive, obviously, to travel and do all that and take the time to do it. So we want to do it right. And right now we've got like a bunch of possible stories. So we're just kind of trying to figure out, like, is it better to do like a micro season of 5, like in a deep dive, like with one scientist and a bunch of families around like a different topic, or to like hit a bunch of things that are like mind boggling that have to all do with psi. So I'm having like internal conversations too, just to figure out what the best approach is. I'm very curious to people's thoughts on that, but we have a lot of the content. It's just like when and how to release it,
Yeah, well, I really enjoyed it, and I was late to the game. I saw the viral messaging and marketing, and I never like to jump on a bandwagon early, so I waited until the pressure got too much from the listeners, and I had to get on board, and I'm glad I did, because even like I say, just as a parent, it's a fascinating subject, and it does tie in with the UFO topic, consciousness, It's incredible. So go check it out, folks.
Yeah.
Telepathytapes.com's got the additional content on there as well. I would very much recommend folks, once you've listened, go and watch those videos too. Got a lot of really good content. And Ky, thank you very much and well done.
Thank you, Andy. Actually, can I say one thing as a gratitude for your listeners really quick too? Because like, the families, for them, this has been a long time coming, being dismissed and disregarded. And I think the response has been so positive and so validating that they're being seen and heard. And, I'm obviously on like text threads and email threads with so many people involved, and they are aware of like when the skeptics are coming out with knives and attacking their kids for how they're communicating, and that's painful because it's like reliving all the stuff they've done. But what's so beautiful is the amount of like listeners and people who are coming into their defense and like jumping on social media and like, defending them. And so I just want to say that like all the people doing that, it's really loving. And I know that level of like kindness and support and allyship, it is deeply touching the parents and the families and the teachers who put a lot out there. So thank you for coming to their defense.
That is all for this episode. Thank you very much for tuning in. Don't forget to leave the podcast a review on your chosen platform. Apple and Spotify do make a huge difference to the algorithm. If you're checking the show out on YouTube, please don't forget to like and leave a comment on here as well. Any sharing you do is very much appreciated on any social media platform. And finally, you can listen to shows ad-free and sponsor-free in their glorious full versions by subscribing for less than the price of a coffee on Apple, Spotify. Just search That UFO Podcast Premium. YouTube, you can sign up and be a member, or you can do that through patreon.com. Thank you very much for listening, folks.
It wasn't a tic-tac and not quite a saucer, more like a hubcap designed by Chaucer, a little baroque and quite steampunk, like Alice was playing bass for the Parliament of Folk. The little fucker hovered right outside of my window, and when I shoved out the screen, he made it an issue. I don't think he expected me to see his ass, but I'd had some champagne and smoked a little grass.